Hi everybody, my name is Roger Richards and I would like to speak to you about some issues in our educational system today because they are affecting many children within it and possibly including yours. And then we're going to go on to some parents on the northern beaches of Sydney who are pioneering a very innovative way to re-engineer education and bring children back into connection with their family, with the community, under the theme that it takes a village to raise a child. So we'll be speaking to a few parents who've made the change and they can bring your observations to you. We'll also be hearing from some experts in the field of psychology, student development, and some other anecdotal evidence to support the content that I'm bringing to you. Now, I've been a school teacher for over 16 years. I'm mainstream trained and also Steiner trained, and I've taught in both government and private schools. I also have two children who've gone through the private school system, and I have seen a lot of different teaching practices on both sides of the equation. Now, the whole premise of our educational system is meant to be based on what is developmentally appropriate for the children. And this was the first subject that I learnt in my mainstream training. It was called the developing child. And we studied how the consciousness of the young child unfolds through the year levels, particularly up to the age of year 12, when the concrete and analytical thinking comes more into play. And everything that was in that subject resonated deeply with me as truth and evidence-based. We then moved into, following that, teaching literacy to young children, particularly reading. And everything that was in that particular unit completely contradicted what was in the developing child. Now, I raised this with the good doctor of the faculty at the time I was studying, and they totally agreed with me. But the other thing they said, well, look, this is just the way it's done here in this country. So it's a little bit like it or lump it. So I had to lump it, but I didn't like it, and I don't accept it today. Unfortunately, I have explored and developed other alternative ways of teaching, and being in a position of analysing data and assessment in a government school system, I can assure you that the results of alternative models outstrip those that are developmentally inappropriate. Now, one country that does follow developmentally appropriate principles is that of Finland. So we're going to be hearing a little bit of the Finnish model as well. The Finnish model has been presented here in Australia to all the school principals. I attended a conference with Pasi Sahlberg, one of the leading educational experts in the world. But the response here was basically, oh, well, that might work in Finland, but we are different here. Well, we are certainly different here because we do things that are developmentally inappropriate and things which aren't evidence-based, despite what is, parroted within the realms of the department. Now, I want to raise another really seriously big red flag with you as well. And this is the issue of student stress and anxiety. And there's so many children now who are either on suicide watch or under medication to deal with these issues. And we'll also be hearing from Gabor Mate, and I might just bring in a clip of his right now.
There's been articles in the New Yorker and the New York Times within the last 4 or 5 months about the rising tide of childhood suicides. There is a vast increase in the number of children being diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, with anxiety, depression, self-cutting, obsessive compulsive behaviors, and so on.
If you watch the full clip of Gabor Mate, he also goes in to the impact upon the psyche of young children that childcare centres and early learning centres generally have.
So they lose the connection with the parent. Do we wonder then that the child's circuits of anxiety and panic in the brain are activated and extra overactivated? These are natural consequences of an unnatural culture.
And this triggers a lot of the burnout and a lot of the anxiety and stresses that that come to the surface as the children move up through the high school in particular. We need to look at what are the complexity of factors that feed into this. Now, one of them, of course, is the workload. The other is the unrealistic expectations that are placed on students in a very competitive type of environment, and also a number of the irrelevant and inappropriate content that is brought down through our curriculum. The children are learning in a very stressful environment. The teachers themselves, many of them on the brink of burnout and carrying significant stress, and are generally under-resourced and sometimes quite inexperienced to deal with the demands of a complex cohort of students. I'd like to show you a clip now from Dr. Mark McDonald, who is a psychiatrist in the US who deals a lot with children who've come through the school system. And here's a very explicit and direct message that he's got for you right now.
You've worked with countless children and families through the years. How has it changed your opinion regarding the public school system?
I would have said 2 or 3 years ago, there are good public schools and there are bad public schools. Find a good one and send your kid to it. Don't waste your money on private. I have now begun to tell parents for the first time in my career, in the last year, take your children out of school. The government school system is not only a failure, it is irredeemable. We would be better off if all Americans pulled their kids out of the government schools and either did homeschooling or built their own schools in their local communities. I can hardly believe I'm saying that now, because just 2 or 3 years ago, I would have thought that that is extreme, ridiculous, and unnecessary. I believe not only is it possible, it is actually requisite now for Americans to do that. But you have to place your children first. You're going to have to give something up, something, in order to protect your child's growth and future.
So he's very direct. So we also need to look at what is underpinning our educational model at the moment as well. And it is this. It is that of regulation, of compliance, of assessment, of setting quite high learning outcome expectations at the expense of student welfare. And in a very competitive environment, when you consider standardized testing, NAPLAN, and our whole HSC model, not to mention other practices that play out within the classroom as well, whether it be academic or behaviour management, which also comes in and affects the way children feel about themselves. And we're also going to hear about the disconnect between some of these tests and also the student themselves and the way a student feels about themselves and their learning. And here's a recent mathematics exam that was HSC here in Sydney, and some comments here that you can see on screen by one of our leading educational experts on the impact that this particular exam had upon the students. It is just like our education system is, okay, very academic, but it's just devoid of heart, it's devoid of soul, and it's devoid of the feeling and the real emotional connection with the students who are coming through it. We are meant to be the guardians of these students. We're meant to be educating them and nurturing not just their academic prowess, but also their well-being, their emotional life, their emotional bodies. What about connecting their mind to their feelings, their mind to their soul? We can educate their body through movement, through sports, through dance and other activities, but what about the emotional being of the child? How do we really educate the soul of a human being? Now, Gabor Mate, as this little clip I'm about to bring up as well, he talks about a compassionate inquiry. So this is where we do question where we are at in our life at the moment and what is best for our children. And then we go on to speak to a couple of parents who have followed exactly what he has said, and we're going to go out and meet them just in a few moments. So here's Gabor once again.
We can recognize that we live in a toxic culture that by its very nature affects children's development in such unhealthy ways that children are increasingly mentally unbalanced and desperate to the extent that they're cutting themselves and even trying to kill themselves. So we have to look for those conditions, not in the individual mind or brain or personality of the child or youth. We have to look at them into social conditions that drive children in those directions. Usually it takes some inquiry, what I call a compassionate inquiry, of looking at ourselves with real curiosity. What is causing me to live the way I'm living, and why is it not working for me?
Okay, I'd like to welcome along Mike to the platform. And Mike, I understand there's been a homeschool revolution in your household. How's that been working out for you?
Yeah, there has. Thanks for having us, Rog. There has. It's been an amazing change in our home. It's been a real revolution for the kids, which has really filtered through, the changes have filtered through all the way to our home, into us as parents, into us as a family and community. It's been an amazing shift. Very, very happy.
Okay, how would you describe the decision-making process with this? Was it smooth sailing? Was there resistances? Were you opposed to it? What was it like?
Yeah, it was a tough decision initially. There were resistances to it from the kids and obviously from society, because society doesn't want us to do what we're doing. Once my wife and I got together and we made all the decisions and had all the information in front of us, it was quite an easy decision. But getting the kids on board and getting things started and done, that was the tougher part. But as I said, almost a year on now, the best decision we've ever made, and we're so grateful and thankful for making those decisions then at the time.
And Mike, it's actually refreshing to hear you say that it was the parents who actually took the responsibility for this, because it's like we are the adults and sometimes we give our power away to children who don't perhaps really understand the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Of what's happening in our world. Now, Mike, when your children were attending the school that they're at beforehand, did you have an impression of the work they were doing, like in terms of the quality and the content?
I did.
Of the work?
So my 3 children were at a mainstream public school, and although they were happy on a day-to-day basis, they seemed to be doing a lot of busy work, a lot of nonsense work that didn't really have much heart to it. It was almost like the teachers were giving them things to keep them busy, and it was a very much cookie cutter mold, where the work that they were doing, it didn't let them express any individuality, and it didn't let them express who they were. It was kind of a one size fits all model, which didn't fit any of my children, because my children are all different, as all children are different.
Okay, Mike, I'd like you to have a look at this clip that I'm about to run, and this is from a school in Finland. And for those of you who don't know, Finland has been leading the Western world in educational outcomes for well over a decade now. And just have a listen in particular to the amount of work that they don't do compared to the amount of work that we do here. Here we go.
It's 8 a.m. on a cold morning in the suburbs of Helsinki, and these primary school children are getting ready for class. This is a school system that for years has been among the world's best, and yet these kids will spend half as much time in a classroom as Australian children.
Mike, I understand that you have a successful business. So I'm sort of wondering then, seeing you're quite successful in what you do, how your schooling prepared you for that, because and what criticism you'd have if you're quite successful in your life.
Yeah, good question, Rog. School really didn't help me get where I am today whatsoever. I was a young man growing up with ADHD in the 80s and in the early 90s, and back then ADHD wasn't understood. As I said before, with the cookie cutter mold of the mainstream school system, if you don't fit the parameters or the way they want to teach you, then you're kind of a throwaway. And I had the constant report cards and my teachers being filling in my parents saying that he doesn't work to his potential, he could do better if he sat still. But really what they were saying was that I didn't fit the mold, so therefore it wasn't going to work for me. And as you said, I'm a self-employed businessman. I'm doing very well and a well-rounded human being, and that is despite the school system. Not because of. I left the school system very early because it just didn't suit my skills, and I went straight into an apprenticeship, and I absolutely worked really, really hard to get to where I am, and that's despite going to the mainstream school system.
And statistically now, like, we are recognising and identifying far more children coming through the school system who have more complex learning needs, whether it be ADHD or autism, etc. And the first question that is raised, well, why is that? What has changed in our world over the last, say, 20 years or so that has brought about this change? And I just suggest that everyone does their homework on this. You won't find the truth in the mainstream, that's for sure. But just ask yourself that particular question. And we're going to be speaking to a lady very soon, Mike, that you'd be interested in, who's a naturopath. And we're talking about the holistic benefits of homeschool and one of the reasons you're seeing changes in your children. And this might be something that's coming up that'll interest people as well. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Mike, because I'm aware of this, did you come across any interesting behaviour management practices that were going on in the classroom with your children?
I did. I don't know if I'd call them interesting, but I did notice a common theme from kindergarten up to year 6 in the main school system, and that was point scoring. They would jazz it up and give it a name that the children could get on board with and like, but it really was point scoring, and it was always at the front of the room. It was next to the whiteboard, full vision of all of the children all day long with everyone's names, and then points next to them for behaviour and for doing the right thing and for towing the line. And I don't think that's how you raise children. I don't think that's how you raise individuality. That's how you raise automatons and how you raise robots. There was a big issue, and one of the main factors why in the end we pulled out of the system.
Well, to me it sounds a little bit like this social point scoring credit system that's happening in China.
It does sound very much like it.
And one of the discussions that we've had as educators as well is well, if we want children to behave better, rather than giving them points or something on a somewhat materialistic level, why not appeal to what's good within them and what is the right thing to do? That's more the basis that I'm finding that people of home learning are working from. What is the right thing to do? So there's a different set of values coming through on home learning that is not there in the mainstream.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, the other thing we touched on before was the amount of content, the amount of learning, but also the style of things coming through the curriculum in the mainstream. And when I was teaching there, some of the things that we're being asked as teachers to teach the children, I just consider completely inappropriate, particularly for the primary school children.
Absolutely.
And I'd like you to have a look at this clip that came up very, very recently on this very topic.
Wackademia, the wacky world of academia, and there's so much happening. This is the culture wars right in our face every day. A number of New South Wales schools have changed the word grandparents to grandfriends to be more inclusive. No, it's not inclusive, folks. It's not inclusive. It's just idiotic.
As soon as you hear the word to be more inclusive, or we're going for inclusion, that there is some huge Orwellian nonsense that is coming down the pike at you at 80 miles an hour and about to steamroll you with just something that sounds, this sounds really, really nice. Oh, yes, grandparents, grandfriends, we don't want to offend anybody. Who could be offended? Who could be offended? Well, of course, we know what this is all about.
And one of the biggest threats against Marxism, socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it, that far left ideology is the family. So it's no coincidence that so many of these attacks, whether it's chest feeding or birthing parents or grandfriends or all sorts of other nonsense that we see and have become almost normalised now because we hear it so often. They centre around the family, and we've got to call it out. And you're right, the left take these words that are positive words like inclusion and diversity and tolerance, and they almost twist them into something where people know when they hear it, it's not genuine. If you don't resist, this will become normal. And what you're used to and what you prefer will be bigotry and exclusionary, and you've got to fight it. If you don't fight it, you're going to get more of it.
Speaking of parents, Rita and James, hundreds of emails, this is in Virginia, hundreds of emails have exposed angry parents in Virginia over the state's critical race theory and COVID-19 mask rules inside the classroom. So there was an email dump, and it came out that parents are actually furious about all this stuff, the gender-bending LGBT campaigns, what they refer to as perverted tutors, brainwashing on critical race theory. So the parents are aware of it.
The parents were just absolutely fed up with because the kids weren't learning anything.
Florida, I'm sure you'd be happy to learn, is now going to ban some of this medical transitioning for under 18s. So what we were told it never happens, but it does. And Florida has said not in our state. So we need to see more of that across America and hopefully across Australia soon, because none of this stuff that we're talking about is just exclusive to America. It's happening in Australia.
So with this homeschool revolution, has there been other changes in your household that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, there has. There's been some really, really big changes. I mean, nowadays, obviously, in everyone's home, screens are a huge factor. And while in some cases they do have their place in learning, and in our home, we were never on iPads and laptops and screens, but we did have televisions going. We did have a television going of an evening, and everyone was relaxing. And since being in the homeschool revolution and since connecting back to Mother Nature and connecting back to heart, we no longer have televisions nor iPads, no screens whatsoever. And we're finding after dinner of a night time where we're singing, we're drumming, we're playing chess, we're connecting, we're hanging out as a family. And it's had such a profound effect on my children. They now they don't get bored anymore. They can go to a place, they make do with what they have there, they draw, they colour. They're being creative. It's taking away the screens has just brought this creativity to my children that I'm so thankful and grateful for.
Look, in discussions that I've had off camera with other educators here too, is that it's this underlying philosophy of not so much bombarding children with information and facts and figures from devices, but finding ways to use our humanity to open up a child to broader learning, to the world in generally, and for the child to arrive at a place where they will just want to learn and take charge of their learning generally. So just in terms of other people who are considering homeschool learning, is there anything that you could offer in terms of the decision-making process?
Yeah, I guess it all really comes down to choice and decision, and the decisions that we make as parents. When we were talking about leaving the mainstream system back in late 2021, we had about 30 or 40 families around us throughout the years of my children who were all talking the same ideas that we had and were unhappy with the current system, and come to where we are now, 2022. Out of that 30 or 40 families, we're the only ones who actually made the decision to do it. Because in hindsight, because a lot of those people were letting the child lead, letting the child make the decision, not wanting to upset the child. And look, it wasn't a popular decision in our home. Christmas 2021, early 2022, when we made this decision, my youngest daughter just wasn't happy about it. My oldest boy was supposed to go into high school. So it was a hard decision and a tough decision that we made, and my wife and I made, with our children's health and future in mind. And while it was tough then, the benefits we've reaped and the rewards by making the decision it's just out of this world. And if I could say to parents out there, don't let your children aren't old enough, they don't have the capacity to be making these decisions on what is the formative and most important years of their life. You need to take action, and you really need to make the decision yourself as adults with a fully formed brain and a full ideas of what's actually going on in this world.
And I sort of hope, and I think this will be the case, say Mike, that the trust and the faith that your children have placed in you will be rewarded so many times over that it's almost, you can't measure it.
Absolutely. And to sum up, the system's broken. The system's been broken for years. It's been broken since in the 80s. It's back as far as you want to go, since I was a child at the very least. And it's not getting better, and I think it's at a point of absolutely falling apart. So whether you kind of make that decision now and get ahead of the curve, or you wait for things to get really, really bad with the woke agenda and all the negative things going on, you may as well do it now while you can and get your kids ahead of the curve.
Well, Mike, I thank you for the time, and also congratulate you in the courage you've shown in making such a change in your life, not for yourself so much, but more for your children and your home family. It's not just the schools that are in trouble in New South Wales. Check out this little incident.
An incredible controversy at the University of Sydney raises the prospect that a 19-year-old female student active in the Liberal and Conservative clubs has been indirectly targeted in a criminal law exam question. Many students contacted Freya Leach after they were set a detailed question that included references to a Mercedes-driving right-wing student called Freya killing a woke student and having unprotected sex while HIV positive. It's just extraordinary and bizarre, this story, isn't it? So let me welcome to the set Freya Leach. What do you think has gone on here?
We have no idea. At worst, it was malicious. At best, it was utterly incompetent. I find it extremely hard to believe no one could conduct a 3-second search of the class list and realise there was a Freya. Not only was there a Freya, in my class there's also an Adam and a Zoe, 2 other characters which are also mentioned in the exam. It was just horrible, and to be vilified in such a graphic way and for that to be distributed to 400 peers makes me wonder what is going on.
Okay, so the question then becomes, if we take the children, our students, from a place of institutionalised learning and take them out into nature, places such as this, take them out even into people's family homes, and then raise them with a combination of the village, of parents as well as professional educators, what sort of outcomes could we expect?
Blue as the sky, red as the heart of a waterfall. Wrap your mantle round, my heart listens to your sound.
So Tash, I'd like to talk a little bit to you about the holistic needs of young children and whether or not their needs are really being met within the confines of an institutional educational setting. And one of the things, for example, that occurred to me when I was trying to take a group of children out to play on the lush manicured lawns of our lovely school that I was at the time, for them to take their shoes and socks off and connect with earth, I was told that according to the regulations under the New South Wales Educational Act that was not allowed, and that children could not walk barefoot outside. Now I'm not talking about out in maybe bull ant territory like this where there's snakes and other nasties, but with on a manicured lawn within a suburban New South Wales school. It just didn't make sense to me. And I've also heard studies, and maybe you can help us out here, that by a child or any human being walking barefoot in nature, that it has a kind of grounding and, how would you say, an energising effect or a nurturing effect on their whole immune system.
Yes, that's correct. The immune system, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, this is all really well measured actually, predominantly by the Japanese. They have a technique called Shinrin-yoku, also known as forest bathing, and they have an immense amount of data on forest bathing. But circling back to Roger's comment on common sense, none of this will surprise you when I list it to you. It all feels true. But if we do need it to be quantified, these are the markers that we do see improve when we are simply out in nature. Blood pressure will drop, your cortisol levels drop, produced by your adrenal glands. Now, cortisol is something that's often elevated in insomnia and really hard to sleep well if our cortisol levels are high. It also means our melatonin production can be low. So the best thing you can do for sleep disorders is spend lots of time outside during the day to retrain your body on the night and day rhythm. This is very difficult in mainstream education where we're using screens more and more. So children are staring at bright lights, and the primitive response of the body is, I need to keep producing cortisol. It's nowhere near close to nighttime, so I'm now also going to have trouble falling asleep. So we've got children that are more anxious than ever. They're not sleeping deeply, and their immune systems are compromised. So being outdoors is one of the best things you could do for your health right now. It's completely free to be outside, and yet we are constantly discouraged to do so. Over and above all of those markers improving, your microbiome, which you may have heard of before, or the flora, that is really a symbiotic relationship that we have as human beings, will drastically improve. The diversity of microbes that are outdoors is much more vast than the microbes you expose yourself to when you're indoors. Once again, the stronger your gut flora, the stronger your microbiome is, the more resilient your immune system is. You're less stressed, so you're going to learn more, you're sleeping better, and your gut health has improved by just being outdoors, being exposed to a greater variety of microbes.
Well, I'm shocked, Tash, because we were very much induced into providing calmer classrooms, which we did for children with wonderful atmospheres for the children to learn in, but nothing to this degree. And I seriously question and wonder why this kind of knowledge and science is not brought into the field of education. It just astounds me. So speaking of children and outcomes, have you noticed any differences at all in, say, the well-being of your children and the way they carry themselves either at home or just generally out in society, or their attitude towards learning at school?
Yes, yes, and yes to all aspects of that question. First of all, as we're talking about being outside, one of the most beautiful transitions I've seen is whenever we're outdoors now, even if it's on the weekend or just at a friend's place, all they need is outdoor space and they're content. They don't need even a playground. They're incredibly imaginative and creative with their play. They're very comfortable in nature. They're climbing trees again. And they're not asking for anything. I don't hear them say, I'm bored. When are we going? Are we there yet? I don't hear that anymore. As far as learning, they're so excited to go to school. All three of them, and there's an 8, a 12 and a 13-year-old, are sad when it's the school holidays. I've never experienced that as a parent before, where my children are crying because it's the school holidays. They're very proud of the work that they do and they share it with me. And as siblings, they're closer because they're spending more time with one another. They're more content within themselves, and so the relationships around them are deepening. They're singing more. We have more singing in our home as a family, and that's a really beautiful experience, especially having, close to teenage boys, to watch them soften and open up and express their emotional selves with more tenderness. It's really beautiful to witness as a parent. And now I'm blown away. I need to upskill with my wildlife and my outdoor awareness because they are leading the way.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Good news. And it could be good news for you as well. Tash, we were chatting before about how some students are set up to fail and how they have really struggled within the system. Now, just in terms of your academic prowess at school, how would you describe that?
Well, it's really interesting actually, the contrast. So in technical academic terms, I thrived at school. I did very well. I was a straight A student. I was a deputy head girl in a very posh school, and constantly told that I was doing well and expected to continue to do well. So I felt immense pressure to continue to achieve, and I felt that my sense of self-worth was contingent upon my achievements, and that without my achievements that I wouldn't be valued. So I actually found academically I thrived, but my nervous system was completely compromised. I was grinding my teeth at night and clenching my jaw because I felt so anxious to continue to achieve. And I became a bit of a perfectionist, which I don't think is healthy. So even though I technically got a great school report, I don't believe that it did me any favours.
Okay, so the question that is also raised here then is educational outcomes at what expense? And are we really looking into the issues of student welfare and how they are really progressing? And if you take a longitudinal look at this, what is happening to children who are suffering sustained stresses at school, and how does that play out into their adult lives? And I think we're going to be finding a bit more of this with Generation X, who are now coming through this particular system. So I must take my hat off to you, Tash, for making the decision to make such an enormous change to the educational direction of your children. And the Northern Beaches of Sydney are a very conservative part of our country, and for anyone to consider making such a change from the kind of education that we've accepted for many years here, it's the norm, to doing something that I would consider to be radically different, even though it isn't that much different. We'll touch on that. But what were the major obstacles to making such a decision? Were you confronted by something that was very much out of left field with this?
Yeah, thank you, Roger. It was a difficult decision to make. However, we have absolutely no regrets and there's no looking back. So some of the initial hesitations came from the fact that we've only been in mainstream schooling. We haven't been with any other type of education system before. Financially, we were concerned about how we would work and support this lifestyle, and we've made it work. Both my husband and I work, and we've made it work. But what really helped catalyse this transition and really propel us forwards was the fact that we'd already taken a stand with our health and our values there. So over the last couple of years, if you didn't comply with the mainstream narrative, you were quite isolated and judged and restricted in your movements. And we'd already done the hard yards there, so we knew what it was like to feel on the outskirts. So this now felt like a natural transition. We're standing our ground with how we feel about health and community, and now we're standing our ground with how we feel about education, and the two really feed into one another.
So we're definitely pioneering, but there is science and there is a lot of understanding and wisdom behind this shift in direction. And would you agree, Tash, that maybe this form of education is the way of the future that's been driven by some pioneers in our society?
Absolutely, it's the way of the future, and it's an evolution of the way of the past. So we've adjusted and we're adapting and evolving, adding modern education research and techniques to what has always been known. So it's a beautiful evolution.
So those resistances and the concerns about making such a change, was there anything that came your way that was able to be offered to you or provided that helped you work through the challenges of this kind of decision?
Well, being a really supportive community, we're all there for one another in any way we can be. So we're very good with logistics, we're very organised with who's helping out when and where. And knowing that there are so many other people that are also approaching this with a little bit of trepidation was quite assuring, because we're all in it together. And so logistically we had support. Financially we absolutely made it work, because we really decided we can't afford not to. The cost was so much greater if we didn't make this choice, and it has actually absolutely worked out. There's been no compromise to our incomes whatsoever, because we've taken this leap of faith with an immense amount of courage, and it's working really well. So I encourage you, if you are concerned, share your concerns, and as a community, let's see how we can support one another to problem solve and reduce those risks and concerns for you.
And Tash, what was your first introduction to actually meeting people in a community like the one that we are both now involved in?
Well, there was an information gathering where we were all there, beautiful like-minded humans, some with more experience in homeschooling than others. So like I said, we didn't have any homeschooling experience whatsoever. That was the very first introduction, yeah. But I will say I did meet one of the wonderful educators at a like-minded protest.
And what were your thoughts or what were your feelings walking out of that information session?
I felt inspired. I actually felt quite moved and emotional. I found myself teary, because when it was being described to me how the child is held, how the child is seen, and what learning is really about, I actually was grieving for my own experience in education and how much we've lost touch with what true community education and health even looks like. So I was much more emotional and moved than I anticipated.
Well, reflecting back on what we spoke about before, about the holistic, meeting the holistic needs of the child, and the work that you do, Tash, it's almost like this bridge has appeared between the work that you do with adults and how we can bridge that across to children. So they may never need that bridge as adults to come and see you. We might put you out of business, Tash.
And I would be delighted. One of my goals with my clients is I want you to need me less and less. So please, I'm delighted if that's the outcome.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing here is, realistically, we'll probably only be reaching out to a small percentage of children who'll be fortunate enough to come into such an environment, a learning environment as this. So we won't put you out of business, but that's a sad story in itself.
Yeah, it is. It is sad that they need so much support. I do have children that are clients seeing me. They are in mainstream schooling. They are stressed. They're on their devices till very late at night, and often going back on them at 1 a.m. when their parents are none the wiser. They're not sleeping well, and they're not eating or moving their bodies well. So all of those things are compounding for all sorts of health risks, mental and physical.
Well, when they realize that how they live their lives, that the disease is not an accident, the disease is a manifestation of how they live their lives, informed by their unresolved trauma. When they deal with the trauma and they develop a different relationship to themselves, all of a sudden the disease lightens up for them, as you expect it would once you realize that the mind and body are inseparable. And by the way, I'm not the only one who writes about this. There's been researchers from Harvard and elsewhere who've documented similar cases. The point we're all making is that the mind and body is inseparable. The individual is inseparable from the environment. And so that when you look at the whole person in their whole environment and the whole context, we have powerful modalities of healing available to us that Western medicine, unfortunately, seems unaware of.
Okay. So welcome to the new way of doing things, and the way of the future. Okay. And what we're going to do now, Tash, we're going to tap into another one of our community members and hear their perspectives on this wonderful journey that we're part of.
Sounds good.
Okay, catch this. I'd like to introduce you all to Amber, who's such a pioneering and amazing lady. And Amber, we've just caught a few glimpses into this wonderful home learning community that you've established. And I'm sort of wondering, how did this all come about? Were you sitting at home bored one day, or is there a bit more to it than that?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks for doing this for us. Education has always been a passion for me. My mother was a teacher, and I was lucky enough to go through the Rudolf Steiner system from preschool all the way up until year 10. And so it's sort of like a way of life, really, for me. But late last year, my circumstances changed dramatically because of what was going on in the world. And I decided that my children, my two boys, they deserved better, really. I wanted them to have true freedom in the sense that connection to land, connection to things that are real, that's going to help them build their own skills in life, how to look after themselves, how to cook, how to grow their own food, how to build their own houses, real things and skills for life. And also I loved actually lockdown learning, and we all did, because we prefer to spend most of our life outside in the bush. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. However, I felt that homeschooling was really isolating for the people that I had spoken to about homeschooling. And so there was a collective group of parents, and we got together, we found each other, and now we've established this incredible learning environment where we're homeschooling, we're all helping each other, we are parents with skills. So we help. There's builders and people who are carpenters. There's people who are into gardening. There are people who are, into medicine and food. And so they share these skills with our whole community. So, that's how it came about.
Because one of the big issues, I guess, a lot of people raise with home learning in particular is learning outcomes. So just in your experience and your observations so far compared to what it was like before you made the change, what could you say about the learning outcomes of your children in particular, seeing you know them pretty well?
They are thriving. We've been doing this for almost a year now, and I see academically, because it's so much more one-on-one focus, and then you have facilitators who share their skills as well. So of course they're getting extra one-on-one or group, facilitated sessions. They academically have come a long way from where they were. And they are grounded, they are loving it. They both have said that they love it, they prefer what we're doing now than what they were doing. I feel that even within independent schools, we are really run by the government at the moment. So it's just a lot of box ticking. It's, having to pass NAP plans. It's all about these learning outcomes, which I don't think service my children at all. I feel that they are thriving now because it's their own skill. It's what they want to learn.
Well, I guess you're touching on the difference here, and we've mentioned this already, the difference between educating a child to reach certain outcomes and then educating the whole child for life and connection to the outside world and also to their inner world as well.
That's one of my passions, actually. I have always believed that you need it's a trinity. You have to build the mind, the body, and the spirit in equal measure. If one of them is built quicker than the other and you haven't developed the body or you haven't developed the spirit, you've just developed the mind, it collapses. One of them collapses eventually, particularly in the teenage years. And for me, that's something I'm seeing is the deterioration in our society, especially of these young adults who have lost the ability to use their body, lost the ability to use their spirit, and they are just all academic focused, and they have these breakdowns. They're anxious. There's all of these problems, and yet dirty hands, dirty feet equals clean mind, as far as I'm concerned. So if you have children who are digging in the earth and out in the bush for half of the day, because they are just happier.
Have you had any children coming into your learning environment who were anxious, and have you seen any change come about with them?
But there has been quite a few who are highly anxious, and then through the year you see a softening and an opening of these children in our group, and because we see them, each family, each parent, each facilitator who's here with them, we really see them for who they are, and we're guiding them.
And the other thing I'm noticing here too, it's not just the children, it's the adults, and I'm seeing and hearing from different people who are members of the learning community how it's affected the adults as well, and some of them saying it's almost like we found our tribe, which is to coin a phrase.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it takes a village to raise a child, and I think that the structure of our society right now is the breakdown of families. Everybody, especially in the last couple of years, is so isolated, but we also were. A lot of families have family overseas, or they don't have this kind of family structure where you have grandparents and parents and children living together. And so when you have a community, when you're truly living in a community of like-minded people, we are looking after each other. It's not for one person. If everybody's responsible for what their input is, it works really well. And connected for me to our land. For me, it's almost like we have to take back how much structure we put in academic learning and institutions and really simplify it, going back to how our elders lived, going back to what's important. And we're pretty basic as human beings. We need food, we need rest, and we need love or companionship. That's sort of like the primary things that we need. And yet everything else we've built around that is on top of this basic needs that we have. So if we can just strip that away a little bit for our children and really teach them what's important, going forward in the future, I think that you're allowing them to have the critical thinking to really be the best that they can be, and you're not jamming them. I think speaking to someone recently, it's almost like the institution of education is like frugwa. It's like they're just stuffing as much information into these children as they possibly can until they're these sort of overthinking children who have no ability to be who they actually were. Saying is these children, they leave university or they leave high school and they're like, right, I've got all this knowledge and information, but who am I and where am I in this world and how can I make this a better world to live in? And then they go off the rails often. And turn to, substances and all these things to try and find meaning in their life. Whereas if we give them the meaning, which is our surrounding, it's, being in the environment that we live in and giving them a wholesome education is allowing them to blossom and grow. Each child or each person is born with everything they need, like a seed. You have this seed and you plant it in the ground and it grows into what it's destined to be. Depending on the conditions, if it's rain, they need rain, they need sun, they need nutritious soil, and they will be the best that they can be. So children, they have come to us already with everything in them. So it's up to us to create the right environment for them.
And I guess that's quite different to feeding a plant or a child with compliance, regulation, stress, anxiety, lots of homework, and a lot of busy work, rather than organic connection, if I could use that term. Okay, now you mentioned looking into the future as well. Do you have like a future vision or a structure for where this could lead to?
I certainly do. Look, it all did come from a bit of a dream and a vision. I have a dream that we will have, a piece of land somewhere close by on the northern beaches of Sydney, and where we create, the ability for children and parents and families to learn how to look after animals, learn how to cook their own food, learn how to grow their own food, learn how to sew and knit and create their own clothes and their own creativity and art, how they learn how to build a house, how to build a shelter, how to run a business. If you were to have a market stall or something, these young teenagers, give them something real for them to do. They will do it, rather than just the hypothetical bookwork that that can already be integrated into all of this kind of learning. Like maths is everywhere. It is in a garden bed. It is in the leaves on a tree. In a school, you are considered stupid, or you have to have this sort of extra help, and you have to classed in, the C and the D maths group rather than, and that instantly, especially for sort of 11 to 14-year-olds, their moral, their own personal worth goes down because they're just graded. And English is more about wanting to tell a story and wanting to capture the environment around you. It's about curiosity. I want to install curiosity in as many children as possible so that they want to learn. And that's the big difference, I think, in the institution of education now. The government is saying children have to be at this level at this age. And they're suddenly like, the teachers are just ticking boxes and making sure that these children get to those boxes, instead of saying, this child, sure, they might be 11 and they might be reading as a 7-year-old, but gosh, look at the skills they have in this area. I didn't learn to read properly until I was 11. And I was lucky enough that my mum trusted process 2 weeks later, and she said she could not believe it. Something in me had clicked. I understood it. And I was reading like a 16-year-old, she said. Every newspaper, I knew the comprehension of every word. I was emotionally connected to everything. And that's my story. Trusted that I would learn what I need to learn when I need to learn it. And I went on as a high school student as an A+ English student. But as a child, gosh, the creativity that I was able to have through my childhood, I'm really blessed and really lucky to have had that trust in allowing me to play for most of my childhood.
And this is a challenge for teachers in the system too. Is like, on one level, one expectation is to have all the children at a particular level. And the other thing is we're noticing such an increasing number of children with learning needs. And some of those expectations are unrealistic because we are not meeting the children truly where they're at, despite having individual learning plans. Teachers only got so many hands and eyes and arms and legs. You can only do so much. But to have the children in a village, in a space of freedom and nature, there's a lot of holistic variables going in, a lot of good food for the children coming in, and that we don't otherwise get in the classroom.
But I think a lot of the problems in earlier children is that they are made to do something that's developmentally not appropriate.
Yeah.
They're taken out of the imagination and their play into the real world. And this goes with TV and too much screens. There's studies done, but nobody's waking up to the fact that how bad TV and screens are for young children.
Yeah.
Brains are not wired up until they're 10. So therefore, anything that goes in there will be in their cellular structure for the rest of their life. And it's creating behavioural problems in children.
I agree. And look, I have taught in both systems, and I've taught in a Steiner system within a government school as well. And I took the point of view that you do, that particularly with reading, we're teaching children comprehension, we're building up their oral language before we're teaching them decoding, which is just such an abstract thing for a lot of young children. And we don't realise the diversion that it has within their energy system and how it traps them in a particular part of their body without this free flow and whole body learning, whole body listening, whole body movement, engaging the will, engaging the heart and soul of the child, not just this intellectual reasoning.
There's a right time and place for most things, but we've lost in our culture, especially in the Western culture, the connection to spirit, and we're bringing children up too quickly. They're losing their innocence far too young, and then we wonder why they fall apart as a teenager, because they don't have the strength to draw upon when changing into an adult. Doctors straight away start subscribing all of these pills to these young children rather than teaching them the tools to be able to deal with it themselves. Yeah.
Now, Amber, I know that there'll be a couple of people listening to this right now who'll be shaking their head wondering what we are talking about. But if you're one of those people, go and find out how much stress and anxiety is out there in the public school system at the moment, in particular in secondary schools, how many people are on medications, then come back and have another listen.
I know somebody who has 2 daughters in a Steiner high school, And they said that out of 20 children, 9 of them were on some sort of anxiety or ADHD or, sort of type of medication. They were going on a camp, and 2 of them couldn't even go because they were so highly anxious just to go on a school camp. The children who have had a holistic upbringing mostly, but still are finding the real world really challenging.
To complement that, I had a conversation with a gentleman who recently retired dean of a local secondary college here, and the number of children who are on suicide watch in that school alone, and then if you extrapolate that across a number of schools in New South Wales, there really needs to be an urgent inquiry into what's going on. It's serious. The big institutions are very fixed in their ways. They can't really respond to the real needs that are out there. There's a certain fixed way that people think within a box and so forth. But what you are doing is true innovation. It is truly taking into account the needs of children. But it is very different to the norm. So you must be getting a few raised eyebrows every now and then, and people thinking,
look, but I do. It takes a leap of faith. You just have to jump off. If you're not happy and you can see your children not happy, you have to make the change. It's just, you can't look back. I mean, last year, if you had have said that this is where I would be right now, I would have, I was at the despair of losing my job, and all these sorts of things happened to me, and I just was at the lowest of lows. And now suddenly, because of that, we've been able to create as a community something that is so much better than what was.
Yeah, so just to recap on the whole idea of home learning as well, NESA, which is the educational authority here, take the view that a child should be pretty much as educated within their home by their parent, and almost effectively denied a lot of professional support, a lot of socialisation through other learning hubs. And this is really the difference that we are making, or you are making here, Amber. You're really opening up the doors of home learning to community and back to the whole village raising the child, which has got the magic in it.
Yeah, it's just changing people's minds to think homeschooling, or me by myself in my living room with my child, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Could anyone just come in and drop their child into this system?
I think it takes who is like-minded on many different levels, but I do think that what we have, building a community, you need to be invested in being part of a community and doing your bit, because that's what we are. Each family and we help each other to raise our children. And it's not just for one, solely on one person's responsibility. We are highly organized because of the group of people that we are. And we have the most incredible facilitators who come in and share their knowledge with us, because not all of us are are incredible academics. That's pretty amazing to be able to do that together.
Well, I guess there too, there is personal responsibility that comes in here, because I guess ideally children should be registered for home learning, and ultimately it is a parent who's responsible for the learning outcomes of their children.
So 100% the parents are responsible for all of their children's education. So that's homeschooling. That's what we are. Yeah.
So that's good. So there's a certain very strong, rich, broad core of learning that can be offered to families, and then they can complement it if they need to with other resources.
There's all sorts of learning. My children do extra reading and music, and other people do French, and other people do extra maths. And so, the parents do a lot of stuff with their children, some, projects and things that they're interested in.
But just in closing, are there any other points that you would like to raise or highlight for prospective parents?
Yeah, I think that we live in a culture now where we're cotton wooling our children from physical kind of fears to the detriment of our children. So, a child who can climb a tree to their own skill level, it's very valuable for their own learning and development. For a child to have independence and freedom to cook their own food, or to go for a bushwalk, or to give them responsibility And so that is partly what we do as a community, is that we are helping them to learn how to do these things, to find their own responsibility and their own limitations, but not to constantly say, oh, be careful, oh, you can't do that, you can't fall, put some shoes on, you know, for them to go, well, no, I the consequence if I do have bare feet is I might get a cut foot, but that's learning in itself, rather than these. I feel like we're all helicopter parents in our particular society now, where children are so afraid to even leave their house anymore. They can't stay at home, they can't cook, they have the inability to actually care for themselves. So I think it's really important that, especially in this day and age, that we teach children freedom, but not freedom just to go out and get in a car and drive really fast, but freedom for their own limitations and who they are. And with that freedom becomes responsibility, because they rise to that challenge. Yeah.
When speaking to some of the other educators involved, one of the themes that came out was perhaps a lack of rules and regulations, but more the sense of be kind and be responsible. And that sort of...
That's one of our community's main core values, is kindness. If we are kind in all that we do to ourselves and our environment and to other creatures, then that's pretty basic. It's like, are my actions kind? Oh, no, it's not. So therefore you can, rectify that. But kindness is just paramount. Yeah, actually, one of the little boys in our group the other day, we were asking, what did you like, being part of our learning group rather than your old school? And he goes, well, we couldn't even pick up a stick at our old school. And I just thought that was just so where we're at now in society. The sort of old world of learning and institution has become so overregulated, I reckon would be the word. And so therefore the children are not really able to test their own ability. And so they turn to destructive things to test their own ability.
Well, I must say you've done it so well, Amber. Not only have you brought to the children a wonderful organic natural environment, or a number of environments, plus a broad skill set of parents, plus the expertise and skill set of a couple of professional educators as well. I don't know what more you could ask for. And you stripped away the compliance and the regulations and you can't pick up a stick kind of attitude. Yeah. So I thank you. And I think the children who are in your community are just so blessed and so lucky. I wish I was one of those back when it was my turn to go through.
Yeah, no, we are living the dream, I have to say. I'm feeling very grateful. Every day I'm blessed.
So I congratulate all the parents out there who have stepped out the norm, stepped out of the system, and had the courage to bring something new, something better for their children. And many parents who have done that will never, ever look back. And if you're on this cusp of creating something new, well, now is the time to build it. It is in the hearts and the souls of our children who are asking, who are the adults who can hear us? Who are the adults who understand us, who can step outside the system and build something new for the holistic well-being of our children, to integrate education and connect the children right back to the natural world, to their soul, to the spirit and the greater cosmos and the natural world that is around us. It is up to you, and we're here to support you. And if you wish to, you can contact me at HomeSchoolRevolution@outlook.com, and also hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button. We'll try and bring more content to you and more evidence-based, as distinct from what our education system has been based on or purported to be based on. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Every leaf on every tree whispers nature's secrets to me.